At the end of this presentation, you will be able to understand the origins and causes of the Mindanao conflict, especially how historical injustices, land disposition, and inequality affected Muslim Filipinos and fueled their call for self-determination. Second is to identify the major peace agreements and political groups involved, including the Moro National Liberation Front (MNLF), which first championed the struggle, and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front (MILF), which eventually led the path to War MM. Recognize the importance of peace building, self determination, and human rights in achieving lasting peace in Muslim Mindanao, highlighting how inclusive governance, cultural recognition, and economic development are essential for a peaceful future. This will help us better appreciate the sacrifices, challenges, and progress made by our fellow Filipinos in the South, and how peace affects us all as one nation. The conflict in Mindanao, especially in Muslim majority areas like Sulu, has been ongoing for many decades, rooted in a long history of resistance and marginalization. This issue stems from the deep-rooted desire of the Moro people to have control over their own land, culture, and political future, which they had even before colonial powers arrived. However, their right to self-determination was repeatedly denied, first by Spanish and American colonizers and later by post-independence national governments. This report explores how these historical grievances led to armed struggles and how the Philippine government eventually responded through peace treaties, leading to the current autonomous region known as Bar MM. By tracing this journey, we understand that peace is a process shaped by both struggle and cooperation. Alright, let's start with two important terms. Moro is a term that goes all the way back to the Spanish colonization. The Spanish colonizers used it to refer to Muslim Filipinos, comparing them to the Moors of North Africa who once ruled parts of Spain. It was originally used in a derogatory way, but over time it was reclaimed by Muslim Filipinos as a badge of identity, resistance, and unity. Bangsamoro is a more modern term. It combines the words Bangsa, meaning nation or people, and Moro, meaning Muslim Filipino. So Bangsamoro literally means Moro nation, symbolizing a collective identity and political vision. This term captures their aspiration for self-rule, self-determination, and recognition as a distinct nation within the Philippines. Mindanao, located in the southern Philippines, is the second largest island in the country and home to various cultural communities. The Sulu Archipelago, a chain of islands to the southwest of Mindanao, stretches all the way near Sabah, Malaysia. These regions are historically significant as they served as the seats of the powerful sultanates of Sulu and Maguindanao. These sultanates operated independently before colonization and had strong trade and diplomatic ties with neighboring Southeast Asian kingdoms. They resisted colonization fiercely, from the Spanish period to the Americans and even into the Republic era. Today, these are the core areas where Muslim Filipinos live and where the quest for autonomy and peace-building efforts are most concentrated. Alright, let's proceed to the next slide. So, Mindanao is home to three major groups of people, often called the tribe people. First, let's have the settlers. These are mostly Christian Filipinos who migrated from Luzon and Visayas during the 20th century through government resettlement programs. Their arrival significantly changed the demographic and land ownership patterns in Mindanao. Next, let's have the Moros. These are the indigenous Muslim population who have maintained their Islamic faith, distinct traditions, and political structures for centuries. They are the primary group demanding autonomy. Next, let's have the Lumads. These are non-Muslim indigenous tribes who also have deep ancestral connections to the land and face threats to their cultural survival. Conflicts often arise due to overlapping land claims, differing beliefs, and competition over natural resources. A real understanding of peace requires recognizing and respecting all three identities. The roots of the Mindanao conflict go back over a century. In 1898, the Treaty of Paris transferred control of the Philippines from Spain to the United States. The Moro territories were included in this agreement without consultation or consent from the Moro people. Under American rule, military campaigns were launched to subdue Moro resistance. Policies like the Public Land Act allowed Christian settlers to claim lands in Mindanao, displacing the Moros. Traditional systems of governance, such as the leadership of datus and sultans, were dismantled. Education and public services also favored Christianized areas. This resulted in deep economic and political marginalization of the Moros, planting seeds of distress, rebellion, and calls for independence. And now let's have the continuation of historical causes. In the 20th century, these injustices intensified. The Jabida massacre of 1968 became a major turning point. Young Muslim recruits were allegedly trained for a covert operation to reclaim Sabah but were killed by their own superiors when the plan failed. This event ignited anger across Muslim communities and led to the formation of revolutionary groups. In the 1970s, extremist settler groups like the Ilaga carried out brutal attacks against Muslim civilians, further fueling violence. When President Marcos declared martial law in 1972, state-sponsored militarization in Moro areas increased, leading to large-scale displacement and human rights violations. All of this convinced the Moros that peaceful reform was not enough. They needed armed resistance to protect their lives, identity, and land calls for independence. And now let's talk about the groups involved. Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF. The MNLF was formed in 1969 by Nor Miswari, a professor from Sulu. It aimed to establish an independent Bangsamoro nation called the Bangsamoro Republic. The Organization of Islamic Conference, now the OIC, recognized the MNLF as the legitimate representative of the Moro people, giving it international support. It engaged in heavy clashes with government troops, especially in the 1970s. Key agreements like the 1976 Tripoli Agreement and 1996 Final Peace Agreement were milestones, although not fully implemented. The MNLF brought the Moro struggle to international attention and was the first organized effort to seek political autonomy through armed and diplomatic means. The MILF was formed as the breakaway group from the MNLF, led by Hashim Salamat, an Islamic scholar. Salamat felt that the MNLF was too secular and compromised in its negotiations. The MILF emphasized Islamic values and pursued a more grassroots form of resistance, gaining strongholds in Maguindanao and Lanao del Sur. While initially committed to armed resistance, over time the MILF shifted toward political negotiations, realizing that peace and development could not be achieved by violence alone. The MILF eventually became the government's main peace partner, leading to the creation of BAR MM through a more inclusive and consultative process. Let's move to the 1976 Tripoli Agreement. The 1976 Tripoli Agreement, brokered by Libya and the OIC, was a milestone signed by the Marcos administration and the MNLF. It proposed autonomy in 13 provinces and promised respect for Islamic culture, a separate court system, and local security forces. However, President Marcos manipulated the implementation by creating powerless regional councils instead of true autonomy. This betrayal caused deep disillusionment, and the MNLF resumed its armed struggle. The failed implementation of this agreement is often cited as one of the reasons for the prolonged conflict and the erosion of trust in the central government. Let's talk about the RMM formation. When democracy returned after the Marcos era, President Cory Aquino reopened peace talks with the MNLF. The 1987 Constitution allowed for the creation of the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao (RMM) in 1989. However, only four provinces joined: Maguindanao, Lanao del Sur, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi due to the lack of broad support. The RMM was heavily criticized for lacking fiscal and administrative power, being riddled with corruption, and failing to address the region's needs. The MILF dismissed it as a failed experiment, insisting that a new and stronger framework was needed to address the Moro people's demands. Theories of Autonomy, MNLF, MILF, and the Birth of RMM from 1988 to 1996. In 1988, the MILF officially broke away from the MNLF. They didn't agree with MNLF's more moderate approach and wanted full independence, not just autonomy. Then, in 1989, the government created the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, RMM, through Republic Act 6734. This gave some self-rule to the Moro people, but RMM lacked real power and struggled with poor governance. This made people even more frustrated, which fueled MILF's rebellion. In 1996, the government signed a peace agreement with the MNLF, giving more powers to the RMM. Normiswari became governor, but MILF didn't join the deal. Instead, they kept fighting, which shows how peace deals that exclude other groups can actually cause more problems. This timeline explains how the conflict got more complicated. It wasn't just the government versus rebels. There were divisions among the Moro groups themselves. Timeline of ceasefire conflicts and renewed dialogue from 1997 to 2001. So, in 1997, under President Ramos, the government and the MILF signed a ceasefire agreement. This was a big deal because it was one of the first serious steps toward peace. It showed MILF was open to negotiations rather than just armed struggle. But things took a turn in 1999 when President Joseph Estrada came in. He stopped the peace talks and declared an all-out war against the MILF. His approach was more aggressive, which caused huge disruptions and pushed back the peace efforts. Then, in 2001, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo tried to bring back the peace talks. She signed the General Framework for Resumption of Peace Talks, showing she preferred diplomacy over war. This helped reset the peace process and led to more negotiations down the line. So, why this matters? It really shows how much the peace process depended on who the president was. Arroyo's actions here helped set the stage for bigger agreements later on, even if challenges continued. Let's move to cycles of war and negotiation under Arroyo from 2003 to 2008. In 2003, bombings in Davao led President Arroyo to launch military operations against the MILF. This damaged trust, but eventually pushed both sides back to the negotiating table. By 2004, talks focused on ancestral domain, which was MILF's main demand. The idea was to give more land and self-rule to the Bangsamoro people. In 2008, the two sides signed the MOAAD Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain. It was a major step forward, but the Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional. That decision led to new clashes, displacing around 600,000 people. This period shows how legal issues can derail even well-meaning peace deals. It also proved that meaningful autonomy needs to follow the Constitution to succeed. Path to the Bangsamoro Aquino's Peace Push 2010 until 2013. Under President Benigno Aquino III, the government made a lot of progress. In 2012, they signed the Framework Agreement on the Bangsamoro or FAB with the MILF. It covered things like power sharing and wealth distribution, really important stuff. The agreement led to the creation of the Bangsamoro Transition Commission, made up of both government and MILF members. They were tasked with drafting the BBL, but disagreements over things like ancestral domain and Sharia law made the process slow and tough. Aquino's administration brought the MILF closer to governance, not just rebellion, but even with strong political will. Creating a law like the BBL turned out to be super complicated. Setbacks and stalemates, the BBL struggle from 2013 until 2016. In 2013, Norm Miswari, who led the MNLF, attacked Zamboanga City in protest of MILF-led peace talks. The Zamboanga siege lasted 20 days, destroyed communities, and displaced over 100,000 people. It showed that not all groups were on the same page about peace. By 2015, the Congress started discussing the Bangsamoro Basic Law, BBL, which would replace RMM with a stronger Bangsamoro government. But there were arguments about land, resources, and whether it was even constitutional. Then, in 2016, Congress failed to pass the BBL. A major reason was the Mama Sapano clash, where 44 SAF troops died during an encounter with MILF fighters. Even though this wasn't shown in the image, it caused public outrage and really affected the peace process. This part of the timeline shows how peace efforts can be easily disrupted by violence and mistrust, not just between the government and rebels, but also between different Moro groups. Let's talk about the Duterte's legacy from BBL to BAR-MM 2017 until 2019. President Rodrigo Duterte, the first president from Mindanao, really pushed for peace. In 2017 to 2018, he expanded the BTC to include more voices and rebranded the BBL as the Bangsamoro Organic Law. This helped it gain more support in Congress. In 2019, the BOL was ratified in a plebiscite, creating the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. BAR-MM has more power than RMM, including control over its own budget and a new form of government. Duterte's personal connection to Mindanao helped move the process forward. Creating BAR-MM was a huge milestone after decades of struggle. Looking at all these timelines, we can see that peace in Mindanao didn't happen overnight. It took over 40 years of talks, setbacks, and changes in leadership. The three big lessons stand out. The president really matters. Peace efforts usually moved forward or backward, depending on who was in charge. The real root causes. According to political analyst Patricio Diaz, people themselves do not cause conflict, systems do. Political and economic systems, especially those controlled by elite interests, use ethnic and religious differences to divide and dominate. So, the real causes are inequality, land disposition, political exclusion, and historical discrimination. Peace, therefore, is not just about laying down arms. It is about transforming these unjust systems and creating inclusive institutions. Only then can justice, reconciliation, and sustainable peace be achieved. Let's delve about the challenges to peace. Even with Bar MM, many challenges remain. The first is deep-rooted distrust between government forces and moral communities. Second, weak implementation of agreements leading to frustrations. Then, the need for strong and accountable governance structures within Bar MM. Next one is the ensuring inclusive participation, especially of women, youth, and indigenous lumats. Next, corruption risk in managing funds and programs. Let's have the last, which is the continued role of neutral third parties like Malaysia and the OIC to monitor and mediate. Without addressing this, the gains of Bar MM may not be sustained. Let's explore about the human rights dimension. Peace must uphold human rights and dignity for all. Many agreements, including the 2000 Tripoli Agreement, refer to global standards like the UN Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Supreme Court of the Philippines has also acknowledged the Moro people's right to a homeland and self-determination. These legal recognitions mean that peace is not just a political tool, it is a moral and legal obligation. Upholding these rights ensures that the peace process remains fair, just, and empowering for all communities. Let's have the last part of my discussion, which is the conclusion. To conclude, the Mindanao conflict is deeply rooted in historical injustices, land disposition, discrimination, and broken promises. Over the decades, the government has sought to resolve these through peace agreements with the MNLF and MILF, culminating in the establishment of Bar MM. While this is a major achievement, challenges like governance, inclusion, and trust still remain. For peace to truly last, we must continue to support inclusive governance, respect for human rights, and full implementation of peace accords. Only then can the Bangsamoro people live in peace, dignity, and freedom, just like every other Filipino, equally and respectfully. And that's the end of my topic discussion for today. And I hope you learned something. Thank you so much, and until next time.